The signs are all around us. I was on a debate this afternoon on TV Ontario with a man who's a head of infant psychiatry at Sick Children's in Toronto. His point of view was that there's always been trouble with kids and there's nothing new under the sun, there's nothing to worry about. I beg to differ. My own experience, intuition, and also what I see in the world tells me quite otherwise. And so does the intuition and experience of many parents, teachers, and almost anyone concerned with the welfare and well-being of children. Now, when things go wrong in a society, what's necessary for that society to survive is an element of adaptiveness. And adaptiveness means simply that we learn from what doesn't work. We see what's not working, and we are able to appreciate that it's not working, and secondly, able to come up with different approaches to it than the things that we've been used to doing. And yet, when you look at what actually happens in response to all this bad news, on a social level, all we do is apply more of the same. So there's bullying. Anti-bullying programs have never been shown to do any good whatsoever. What's the answer? More anti-bullying programs. When it comes to precocious and premature and inappropriate and harmful sexual activity amongst our young people, moral preaching and admonitions and prohibitions don't work. What should we do? More and more preachings, admonitions, and preaching. And so on and down the line. And what's missing here is any desire or any willingness, any openness to look at the actual dynamics, to understand what's really going on, what's actually happening here, because if we're to address the root of the problem, we certainly have to understand the underlying dynamics. And so much of the advice that parents get these days is actually contrary to what's going to do any good in the development of their children. We're looking at the question of why all these disorders, why 5 times as many kids as 15 years ago on Ritalin, why all these kids on antidepressants, why all the childhood disorders, why the bullying, the precocious sexuality, and beyond that, why the frustration that parents everywhere are experiencing in their relationship with their children, why the sense that teachers have that their role as teachers is no longer valued, and why it's so frustrating for them to interact with their students. So while the media has jumped on our book like a dog on a juicy bone, and we're very pleased and grateful about that, that's not the brunt of our book. Our book is not really about the problems, or we're saying actually that the problems that the media picks up on, the spectacular child killings, the drug use and all that, although they're important issues to deal with, they're only the tip of an iceberg. And what's below the surface is far more important, and what's below the surface affects not only the completely troubled kids, but all kids, or virtually all kids in this society. And if it doesn't affect them directly, it does touch them in one way or another. And Gordon's saying that peer orientation is the phrase that he adopted and actually developed. And he's saying that children in our society today, are contrary to what happened in all other societies prior to now, are no longer looking to the naturally appointed guardians for a sense of direction, for who to be, for how they feel about themselves, for values, for cultural transmission. That they're not looking to a group that's in no position to provide those directions, they're looking to their peer groups. In other words, in short, children are no longer being brought up by adults, they're being brought up by each other. And how does this happen? It so happens that children have a natural orienting instinct. Orientation means to get your bearings. And even as adults, we all know how disconcerting, how nerve-wracking it is to be disoriented, to not have your bearings. And we will look, and if we're disoriented, our first task is to get oriented. Now that's as adults who are far more independent and self-sustaining than children can possibly be. So the child has an orienting instinct. Nature would intend that orienting instinct to be directed towards the adult, as it is in all species, and it has been in all societies until very, very recently. However, the orienting instinct is indiscriminate. It'll go to whoever is there. There's a good reason for that. The natural parents are the natural orienting compass for the child, but they may not be around, they may die. So the child has to be able to transfer that orientation and the emotional attachment that precedes it and goes with it to other caregivers. other adults. What was never meant to happen in a natural order of things is that this orientation point should become peers, immature creatures, in other words. Think of it in terms of the duckling. The duckling will, at birth, imprint on the mother duck. And that means he'll follow the mother duck around wherever she goes. And he'll do that until he's an adult duck himself. He'll let go of the mother's guidance precisely at the point where he no longer needs it, and not a moment before. Now, that's how nature works. In the absence of the mother duck, however, that duckling will imprint on anything. It could be a human being, it could be a horse, it could be a mechanical moving toy. And it should be clear to anyone that neither human beings nor horses or mechanical moving objects are as capable of nurturing that duckling to be an adult duck as the mother duck happens to be. Smart as we are, we can't do it as well as the mother duck will. Same with children. Nature would intend that orienting instinct to be directed towards the parents and to the adult world. But in the absence of that, or when that bond is loosened, there'll be what Gordon calls an orientation void. A void in the child's consciousness or unconsciousness that the brain simply doesn't tolerate. And therefore, the child will orient by whatever's around. Now, what's happening in our culture? What's happening in our culture is that for reasons that go well beyond any question of individual parental choice, that go well beyond parental failure, and really has to do with social and economic and cultural dynamics that govern vast social changes. Because of these dynamics, parents have lost their orienting position. We never used to live in this isolated nuclear family. That's a totally new development in human life. And even a nuclear family with the two parents and the home is under severe siege and stress, and very often it breaks up. And even the ones that remain together are under tremendous stress. And not only that, under today's economic conditions, two parents often have to go out to earn the same living that one used to 30, 40 years ago. Much beyond the nuclear family, which in itself is an inadequate and unnatural conglomeration, there used to be the extended family. And the extended family was the network in which the mother and father were embedded along with their children, and there were other adults around. As Hillary Clinton quoted the African saying, "It takes a village to raise a child," and what she would have meant by that, if she fully understood what she was saying, was that it takes an attachment village, a village of attachments to raise a child. And that means the aunts and the uncles and the neighbors in the community. And in our society, that's all gone. The clan, the tribe, the village, the community, the neighborhood are eroding rapidly. In fact, in many places in our country and in North America, they're gone. People live in places where they no longer know their neighbors. The children don't go into the street with a sense of safety, not just because strangers can come along and molest them, but also because there's no safety out there, there's no safe attachments out there for them. There's no corner grocery person that you've known for 25 years and that your child gets to know and stays in a relationship with. Now we drive to these big soulless supermarkets and we relate to people who have no relationship to our community. A culture that used to support the attachment to the parents no longer not only supports it, it actually undermines it. And we're pushing our kids into situations of peer relating very, very early. Sometimes we do it for economic reasons, as in the daycare situation, but as Gordon points out, we assume that since we're the parents, and since we love them, and since we gave them everything we had for the first 6 months or 2 years, that relationship will survive forever. The fact is there's too much competition right now. And in a daycare setting, unless we're very careful, and we're not against daycare here, all I'm saying is that if we don't ensure that the attachment dynamic becomes conscious, and that we don't put it in place in the daycare so that when the daycare worker replaces us, she or he becomes a surrogate parent. If he's only a supervisor, then that kid will, in that attachment void that's created, will attach to his peers. And I will leave it to Gordon right now to talk about the consequences of that for child development. But in a nutshell, what we're arguing is that the only way to save our children, and I am socially speaking, or economically speaking, a pessimist, at least in the short run. I don't see these trends being turned around. In fact, I see them escalating and being exacerbated and being pushed by some very powerful interests and forces in society, like the globalization, the homogenization. These are all gaining more and more power. So while in the social economic sense I'm a pessimist, I'm a complete optimist on the micro level, that in our homes, in our communities, and with our children and our students, we can actually reclaim the ground that we've lost, we can reorient them to ourselves, and if we wish to save them from the negative consequences that Gordon will outline, that's exactly what we need to do. And having said that, I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Gordon Neufeld.
The general thesis is very, very simple. It's very, very simple. And it's been in developmental science for some time. It just, the word set hasn't seemed to get out. And that is that the most pivotal, the most critical factor in parenting and in child development is not skill, is not a sense of responsibility, is not how-tos, but it is relationship. Relationship is absolutely basic, but it's not only the relationship of the parent to the child or the teacher to the child. Most critically is the relationship of the child to the parent or to the teacher. It is the child's relationship to us, not our love for the child, but the child's love for us, or desire to be close to us, or seeking emotional intimacy, or to belong, or to matter. It is that relationship of the child to us that gives us the context to be able to act with natural authority, with influence, with power. It is the context in which we can teach and do our job. And that is self-evident as that may seem. It's almost contrary to the vast majority of what is being written. As we ask, or the biggest question today is, what should I do when my child does such and such and such? And it is problem-centered, it is around techniques and so on. Now, along came developmental science and gave a word for this relationship specifically, and the word is attachment. And studied it in animals and all creatures of attachment, and now we know that it's the most significant dynamic in children's lives. And so it is the child's attachment to the parent and to the teacher that is important. And the purpose of attachment is to facilitate dependence. It's to push the right buttons in the child, it's to push the right buttons in the adult, in the teacher. It's to evoke the right kind of instincts so that it is to happen naturally. And parenting has been around since the beginning. And for someone to come here, like you are here, to talk to somebody about parenting, our grandparents just would not have done. They would have not. Like, either you knew how to do it or you didn't. There was something wrong if you went to go read a book or if you went to look at it from the outside. And they were right. They were right. But they had something that we don't have. That's exactly because they lived in a culture that supported the relationships of children to the adults who took care of them. They lived in a culture where they had sit-down meals, where they went for walks, where they had games, where the culture meant that you were required to greet a child, and the child was always required to greet you. And in continental Europe and in Latin American countries, that's still so. But we've lost that kind of culture. There's nothing to protect children's attachments to the parents, to the teachers, to those who care for them. And so these attachments have been left unprotected, which brings the problem of the book. The problem of the book is in the wake of that kind of cultural chaos, especially in the New World, all over in post-industrial society, but especially in North America. In the wake of that, children with these huge attachment needs, who cannot tolerate that much separation from their parents and adults and so on, when they are outside of these working attachments, they need to reattach. They cannot stand these attachment voids. So whether it's preschool, whether it's grade 1, whether it is high school, if they cannot keep the adult attachments close enough, if the teachers do not collect them, as we don't do, generally speaking. Oh, there's some incredibly intuitive teachers, but we've got no culture to support that. We've got no pedagogy of attachment, and just as well as we've got no parenting of attachment. What happens is that the children attach to each other. They spin out of orbit, collected by others, go out of orbit around their parents, and go into orbit around each other. And this seems to be happening more and more and more, with disastrous results for development, for parenting, for teaching. It's the children have, when their attachments are undeveloped, and maybe I could just say this, part of what the book does too is join the dots on attachment. Attachment, many people still think of attachment in the baby bonding kind of concept. Attaching through the senses, contact, closeness, so on, being in touch, being in sight, and so on. And what I try and do in the book here is bring all the material on attachment together, to distill it, bring it to the synthesis. But in so doing, when I had assigned myself the task of doing it, I saw 6 themes emerge, 6 ways of attaching. And in doing it, I also began to see that there was a sequential nature to this. And since then, I've had plenty of clinical experience in working with very stuck kids who, as they begin to attach, even 10 and 11-year-olds, it unfolds just like a flower, attaching in one way and first of another. The first is the attaching through the senses. But then as we move to the second year of life, it's attaching through sameness. We feel close to those that we have something in common with. And children attach through imitating and emulating and copying and so on. This is a very, very undeveloped yet. And then comes belonging and loyalty, very, very important. 3-year-olds always take the side of the one that they're most attached to. It has nothing to do with who they think is right, it's who they're attached to. And then it goes to we keep close that which matters to us, and so they want to be significant and special to us. And then, of course, the 5-year-olds get their hearts involved, and they fall in love with who they're attached to. And Braden, my youngest child, I have 5 children so that I can finally get it by the end. And now three grandchildren so that I can understand. But with Braden, when he reached that age, he gave heart rings to all of us in the family and promised that he would never leave us, any of us, and he would marry us all. And it's that kind of very, very heartfelt kind of thing. And then the 6th way of unfolding is that by 6 years of age, girls especially, because they can seem to be able to tolerate the vulnerability involved, and boys not so much, they feel the closest to those that they have shared their innermost secrets with. They have shared their hearts with, in a sense of psychological intimacy. And so we have all of these different ways of attaching. Children, when they don't have developed attachments, when they cannot, not only can they not keep us close, but they are predisposed to attach to those that appear to be the same as them. And so they automatically select, not their teachers, not their grandparents, not their aunts, who they could expect to be more understood by and have more emotional intimacy. No, they select automatically and are predisposed to attach to other goslings, so to speak, other children, because they're the same as. And in that, they cannot be both the same as them. They cannot be the same as adults. They cannot take the cues from both peers and adults. These relationships in today's world become more competitive. And that is the problem with peers. The problem is not with children having friends. In an intact village, where the constellation, when it's working properly, children's relationships with friends coexist with relationships with parents. Peers and parents, children love to have their attachments under one roof. You know, if you're from a split parenting, they love to have the step parents together, they love to have adopted. Everybody who they're attached to, they love to have in one place. But if there is competition in attachments, if they cannot keep close to both at the same time, or if the cues are different, then what happens is, in pursuing contact and closeness with their friends, belonging, love, significance, they automatically resist it with mom and dad. They resist it with adults, with teachers. And that is the problem that is escalating, is in becoming endeared, in belonging to their peers. They are resisting, they are pushing away from, they are alienating. no longer there's hostility there, and that is increasing. That's insidious. It increases with age. And that is a problem. It's a competition. And the implications for parenting are profound. Again, it's a child's relationship to us that makes a child easy to parent. You can have a parent with the same love, the same skill, has two children. One who is in right relationship with the parent, who loves the parent, who seeks to be close, who wants to be with, that child will be easy to parent. And the other child who doesn't want to be close, who doesn't seek to be with, that child will be very difficult to parent. It's not a matter of skill, it's a matter of relationship. And it's the child's relationship to us. And so, and as we lose our natural power and authority, what do? We seek for leverage. And so we become preoccupied with looking for something to hold over a child. Withdraw privilege. You often hear parents say, I don't know what else to take away from the child. We use consequences. We begin to use things in contrived privilege. And one of the worst kinds of things we do, in almost a desperate intuitive attempt to gain some control, is we use the relationship against the child. So when in trouble, we send the child away from us. We euphemize it by calling it timeouts. We do various other kinds of things. It's actually the old kind of way of shunning that was used. It's basically saying, I withdraw my love, my affection, my contact and closeness with you until you comply. What it communicates to the child, of course, is that the relationship isn't important. It also is far too vulnerable for children to handle. If our partners ever treated us that way, after the second, third time of withholding contact and closeness because they didn't approve of something that we did, we would start shutting off the relationship. None of us could withstand that kind of wounding. Children can't either. And so what they do is close off on the emotional close relationship, and we lose even more power. And when we lose even more power, what do? We look for more contrived leverage. We call it parenting. And that is where parenting has come to today. When people talk about parenting, they ask, what should I do when? How do I do? This isn't parenting. Parenting is a relationship. It's a nurturing relationship. But that is where it's come to. And the more we do those things, the more we use the relationship against, the more we send away instead of preserving the contact and closeness. Again, the more impotent we come. The more we assume that somehow it's our ignorance rather than our impotence. And so today, the big cry with parents is, they weren't born with a manual. We assume that we have to know how to do. Our grandparents, again, they would have never, ever thought it was something that happened intuitively. But why could they parent intuitively? Because the relationships were there. What they had is far more power and authority than we did. Yes, some of them abused it. But they had the power and authority to do their job. Today's parents are anemic in comparison to our parents' parents. And our own children are going to even be in a worse situation if we don't reverse this individually. The implications for the children are also very severe. Children require the attachment womb, with an adult to help them grow up. The attachment, just like the physical womb is to the physical self, the attachment womb is to the psychological self, to become one's own person. It needs a safe and secure environment that only a caring adult can provide. If the children, if they prefer each other's company, if they're seeking contact and closeness, if the peers replace the parents as the primary objects of attachment, then that womb doesn't exist. Yes, certainly, the peer attachments are there, but peer attachments don't deliver. They don't deliver individuality. They don't deliver personhood. And so children are stuck in what Robert Bly, in his Sibling Society, concerned about the epidemic immaturity in our society. And what I'm saying in this is going a step further. Is one of the big reasons for this is that children are no longer attached long enough in the wombs of caring adults to grow whole, individual. It takes some time to grow this kind of personhood, and parents are the best bet. Parents are by far the best bet. The implications are because peer attachments don't work. They can't preserve the contact and closeness, and yet attachments are the most important thing for children. It generates incredible amount of frustration. But because the vulnerability is too great, They don't go from mad to sad. They don't go from futility to the sadness, and so they're left with residual frustration, foul frustration, which permeates the pure culture in their dress, in their art, in their lyrics, in their music, and also in their actions. Suicide has quadrupled with young adolescents in less than 50 years. It's not working for them. It's really not working for them. We also have bullying. Well, why bullying? How does that happen? Well, attachment, the whole purpose of attachment is to facilitate dependence. The primary purpose of it is to facilitate dependence. So what it does naturally, when any creatures of attachment come together, be it your dogs, your cats, whatever, is automatically, if they become attached, it sets them into a hierarchy. One in a dependent mode, one in a dominant, and one in a dependent mode. Now, so when children become attached, that's exactly what happens there, is the attachment force puts one in dominant and others in a dependent. Now, they're not responsible for each other. And so you've got some trying to lord it over, preoccupied with dominance. We've got a bully maker. And that's exactly what happens, is a Lord of the Flies kind of thing when children inadvertently marooned by parents. For us, just simply, for myself too, I assumed that I could take the relationship of my children for granted. I assumed that because Tamara and Tasha, my oldest two daughters, we were so close, this would last the distance. And I didn't take care to maintain it. I didn't take care to preserve it. And by the time they became adolescents, then they too fill the void with their peers. And I'll go back to that in a bit in terms of how to win them back. But when children don't have that proper adult covering, it sets a stage where it leads them into becoming dependent on each other or dominating each other, which is a harmful thing. Our blind spots, we seem to have blind spots. Why isn't this? Like, when you say it, when you join the dots, it almost seems self-evident. In fact, sometimes I feel embarrassed talking about it. Because how can science talk about something that's so absolutely there? Well, science always comes lately to what is right underneath our noses. But it seems that this is underneath our noses. We've been blind to. We haven't really seen it. So what's the problem? Well, I think there's a couple of things that are causing our blind spots. One was a very good thing. We became child-centered. But there's a problem in it, is yes, children needed to be put in a sense of the center of our life. But what happens is we put children in the lead. And that's not their rightful place. We were taking the cues from them as to what they need, what's important, and those kinds of things. And so now we have the goslings following the goslings and the mother goose following all the goslings in behind. Now we are following them. And so we're taking our cues. So if our 9-year-old or 11-year-old says, everybody has a sleepover every weekend. Well, if that's the way it is, then I guess that's normal. And so we follow the kids in terms of, they believe when their attachments are skewed, just like if goslings got imprinted on goslings, that would be self-evident for them. And our children that are pure-oriented, it will be self-evident for them that children belong with children. Only we know better. That, no, I'm your best bet, honey. Until you're old enough to be able to hold on to yourself without following your peers, that you can hang on to yourself, I'm your best bet. But we've got to do something about it. We don't have culture working for us anymore. And hence the book is to increase the consciousness of this, so to be able to do those kinds of things. Many of us prefer to be with our peers than our parents. And so it seems to us then to be normal. As long as children are dependent, they need to be dependent upon those who care for them. So our own peer orientation blinds it. In fact, sometimes I've had clients who say to me, I don't know what's wrong with my 13-year-old or 11-year-old. All he wants to do is hang out with us. It's now become the exception. Yeah, now it's become the exception. Again, if you go to continental Europe, where I spent a year in Provence with my family putting this material together, there you saw, at the village fountain, the adolescents hung out with elders, the senior citizens, they were in there. The families went together. When you socialized, you never went with the same age. You always went in, you know, automatically you integrated the other children. The village fetes, the dances, those were the times of the best hierarchical integration. The grandparents danced with the grandchildren, the teachers with the students, and so on. It was all hierarchical. These were the things that we've lost. We've lost that sense. The big blind spot is that we have put a huge value on what is normal. And taking our cues in this way in terms of whatever it is must be the way it should be, instead of what is natural. And there, the book is, I mean, is a commitment to the developmental design. How were we meant to be? From putting the pieces together, how were we meant to be? We were meant, children were meant to be integrated in attachment hierarchies and relate from there to their peers, but within the context of the attachment hierarchies. I just got a couple of minutes here to say what to do about it. Again, in terms of society at large, I don't know if we're going to turn the tide, but a good 1/3 of the book has to do about just how to preserve, restore, win back our children. It has to do with creating a context of connection in which we can parent and teach. And my own experience as both a parent and as a therapist, as a consultant, has been that there are far more successes than our failures. In fact, it goes a lot easier when we put our energy not into behavior, but when we put in energy into relationship. In fact, I've kind of wondered, you know, I get all the presenting problems. Now I'm starting my mentoring phase in life, and so I have therapists coming to me with their problems that they're having with the kids and their clientele. I have parents and I have teachers. And just a rough kind of estimate, it seems to me, that always the focus is on the behavior, right? And always the focus is on the strategies as far as the adult. What must we do? And by far the majority, in fact, I would say probably 80% of the times, it's quite clear that the issue is not conduct or behavior, but it's relationship. Just give you an example. Let's say a friend came to you. A friend came to you and said, "Oh, I've got, something is happening. My spouse, he won't listen to me. He doesn't seem to want to be with me. His eyes don't light up when I come into the room. He is a concern for privacy all the time, never wants me to know what he's doing. He doesn't seem to want to make things work for me. If I say so much as what I wish, he gets his back up. He's full of resistance. He doesn't want to do that. He used to say to me, 'Your wish was my command.' And now anything I suggest he does." Now, if we heard that, our words would not be, "Well, I tell you, you got to use more timeouts. You should use logical consequences for that kind of thing. You can't allow him to get away with that." No. Immediately we know, honey, you got a relationship problem on your hands. This is a relationship problem. Yeah. He doesn't, none of his energy is going to wanting to be with you. It's an attachment problem. Now, we can see it so clearly as adults. Why can't we see it with children? No. But it's been unconscious. We weren't meant to be conscious of it. But the point is, if any of these behaviors occur with a child, we focus on the behavior and look for strategies. But if they focus in any other relationship, we know immediately it's a relationship problem. Well, let me go to how do we restore? How do we win them back? Well, it's not all actually that complicated. Attachment researchers have found that we actually have kind of courting instincts in us. They're very natural instincts that come alive when we're around our own infants, and for very good reasons, is that we've got to collect them, so to speak. We've got to court them to make them our own, because only in making them our own will they relax, will they be comfortable, can we do the parenting, will they breastfeed properly, and all of those kinds of things. So we've got to make them our own so that we can feed them and do these kinds of things. Well, what do we do? Well, I'm going to have to borrow 4-year-old baby here. You're going to be my baby. And I'm going to just model it. You all know this, so it doesn't require a long time. But what I want you to do is think how we do this around infants and then how we transpose it for 6-year-olds, for 16-year-olds, for whoever it is. These are the very same things. It's only a little bit different. I'll go quite quickly. The first thing, of course, is you get in the face in a friendly way. You collect the eyes, and the smile, and the nod. I got all three. Thank you. I just very, very wooable here. Yes, I got this. My baby responded quite quickly, and of course, it just warms our heart when it does. But think of what we go through to get those responses. If the baby's not cooperating, we go like this, and we go, and we do all kinds of things trying to get those responses. Why? It's just instinctive. We don't know what we're doing, but something inside of us is moving to gather the eyes. Now, in intact cultures, in actual greeting rituals, they go through the same thing. If a greeting ritual will actually involve nods, smiles, and eyes connecting. Why? Because these are very basic attachment instincts that are being engaged. And like in Provence, where we were, you can't even buy a baguette unless you engage in proper attachment rituals, first of all. You can't do any business before you start at the first thing, which is you've got to have a relationship. Even if it is a situational relationship, you've got to have one. How much more so with our kids? We've got to do this. But by the time a child is 3 or 4, the research says that the most of the time we get into a child's face or space is when there is trouble. Yeah, when there is trouble. No longer are we building the relationship. Well, maybe it was enough to go the distance in primitive societies when children were adults by age 13 and when the culture was all lining those, keeping those aligned. But nowadays, it won't do you even until the age 5. We've got to get into the business of being able to routinely collect our children. Step number 2. Step number 2 is very easy. If I get that far, if you get to first base, the next one comes very quickly. If you give me your hand for a minute, you want to slip your finger just right in there, right? That feels so good. Why? What are you doing? You're giving something of yours to hold on to. In this sense, it's a finger. That's an attachment reflex. That's not a muscle reflex. That tells me intuitively, instinctively, in my attachment brain, that your attachment instincts, 35 or so, which we can measure at birth, are engaging. That means you want to keep me close. And in holding on to that which I give you, you're holding me close. Now, I'm not going to be giving that finger, maybe to the 16-year-old another finger, but that's not something they could hold on to. That's not what it is, so what do? Well, what I need to do is what I'm wanting to do is nurture or prime the attachment. How do I prime the attachment? I give them a sense of significance, that they matter, a twinkle in my eye. The researchers say delight, warmth, and enjoyment. These are the most nurturing of all. When we give these little signals, I really missed you yesterday, when the eyes light up in terms of it, when there is a sense of specialness or mattering or significance, their attachment hunger is fulfilled. They're going to close their, so to speak, metaphorical hands around it. And in holding on to that, they'll be holding on to us. Yes, but again, we are giving them something to hold on to instead of, first of all, speaking, where our first is a nurturing response instead of what, did you bring your homework today? Now, I got to tell your shoes, you got to put them away. How many times do I have to tell you to do that? And so our interaction again goes not to open them up to nurture for them to hold on to, but rather to focus on behavior. The third step after that is very, very simple with the infant. If I get to second base, then going to third base is I invite dependence. My arms go out, and if the infant is old enough and ready, the arms come up. It's an unabashed invitation to dependence. We're spooked of that in our society. You see, attachment is all about dependence. If we were courting somebody in adulthood, when we got to that stage, we wouldn't say to them, no, wait a minute. Don't expect me to do anything you could and should do for yourself. I don't want you to become too dependent upon me. No. We say, your problems are my problems. Here, can I help? I've got an idea here. I'll help you do this. We're generous in this. Why? Because it is absolutely intuitive part of dependence. And a part of attachment. Attachment is to facilitate dependence. But we're scared. Somehow we've lost our faith in nature. We think that if we encourage dependence, they'll never become independent. We think that if we don't withhold and push them out, that we're going to have them there forever. That's not the way it works. All developmental science is unequivocal in this. The only way you get a child to want to become their own persons, to do it myself, is by fulfilling their dependency needs. Our job is to invite their dependence and to do it generously. It's nature's job, or the developmental process growth, to out of that move them to become their own persons, to stand on their own feet and make them viable as attachment beings. We've got it mixed up. We're doing nature's work, and then they don't have any kind of home base. The third step is that the fourth step to do that, the clincher, is the first act of dependence is to orient them. And that goes right back to the thesis of the book, okay? Pure orientation. The adult takes the place of orienting. This is who this is. This is what we're going to do today. And after this, we're going to do that. And this is this kind of situation. And, oh, you've got, you look a lot like your aunt, and she has this and this, and we're busy orienting. And that's exactly, again, research shows we do this intuitively till about 4 years of age. And then we start letting the peers orient them. And of course, when the peers start orienting them, they follow their peers instead of us. We need to be there. Well, we go over these things and a lot more. How to preserve the relationship, how to preserve the attachment, how to create a village of attachment, especially when one doesn't exist naturally for you. If you don't have extended family, if you don't have a supporting cast, those kinds of things. But the thesis is very, very simple. The thesis is extremely simple. The thesis is that the relationship is the most significant, critical factor in development and parenting. That culture is no longer doing its job in supporting it. It's taken an economic turn, and it's not in the attachment business anymore. So that means that parents and teachers need to get into the attachment business themselves, become conscious of it, and take care to provide that context. We can no longer take that relationship for granted. We need to go and win our children's hearts to be able to do the kind of, to fulfill our functions with them. Well, that was a very quick walkthrough, and thank you for your attention in that. And I hope for those of you that read the book, my hope is that it will resonate with your deepest intuitions, that it will feel as if you always knew this, didn't know the words for it, but always knew this, and maybe didn't know that it was the most important thing to know about parenting, but hopefully it will very much restore and affirm natural and very intuitive parenting.